Hi there, Casey students. My name is Jeff Whitey, one of the faculty here with the DBA program, and I wanted to have this workshop that kind of expands on my previous workshop about just formulating your problem statement. Now we're going from problem statement through the purpose of the study into research. As I discussed in the previous workshop, there's 5 different things that are really a good recipe for a great problem statement that are going to carry forward into our purpose and our research. Some of that is our specificity, knowing the population, regions, market, industries that we want to discuss, knowing what our research gap is, knowing what has been covered and what has not been covered, knowing that current to future state, having a solid business problem, knowing what the organizational or managerial changes are, what the quantifiable business impacts are, or what the consequences for not attaining this is. Looking at the significance and impact, you have to understand the evidence of scale, the unit of analysis, and the broader implications of the problem that we're facing as we go into our research, as well as conciseness and clarity. We want to be very clear of what we're trying to do. We want to make sure that we don't have jargon, we don't have complex language, that our purpose is solidified that anybody could understand. So as we take this information out and we go into what are the research methods that are allowed. Based on Cresswell's work, there's a few different elements in their qualitative and quantitative. As we look at qualitative or things that are not so statistically driven, but require you to have some intuitive thematizing or coding of um, issues or things that you observe, we look at things such as descriptive methods or narrative research, phenomenological elements, grounded theory, ethnographic studies, or even case study. Whereas with quantitative, we're looking at things that are more statistical in nature, things that we're pulling data from. This can be experimental or quasi-experimental designs, such as control groups, be non-experimental designs, such as surveys or primary data exploration, or even longitudinal designs, where you follow certain control groups or subjects over a long period of time. Now, with that, with Acacia, we want to primarily focus on mixed methods for our designs. And what we mean by mixed methods is you can have a convergent style, which is we use our qualitative and quantitative research simultaneously and use that data to explain together. So we're looking at, let's say, if we're doing a um, phenomenological study with interviews and we're doing some surveys in a non-experimental design, we could be using that data simultaneously to help gain insights from, let's say, your survey data that is closed-ended questions with phenomenological uh, open-ended survey or interview questions. So having open-ended and closed-ended together would help us have that convergent method. We would also have what's called explanatory or sequential or a mixed methods where you start off with a quantitative and move into a qualitative to help explain what has happened. Something that is often a case with this is when you want to develop a new model or theory and you want to use some kind of survey or primary data exploration or even looking at an experimental group and then moving into a grounded theory from this. Then you have lastly exploratory sequential, which is you start off with a qualitative and then you move into a quantitative to help explore what you observed within the qualitative study. So, for example, if you do a case study over how a group looked at a certain piece of software, or if you wanted to look at a case study of how a school reacted to changing policies on how they did a specific thing, you would then move into some kind of a quantitative measure to help validate that. So you'd be looking at maybe surveys at a larger group of people to validate what was seen in the case study, or you'd look at maybe primary data exploration to see if what's being revealed in a case study or narrative research is true over a larger data set. So as we look at these research methods and we know what's in our problem statement, we want to think about what Cresswell talks about with the relationship of these problem statements, the research methods, and also what's called philosophical worldviews. So all these have a connection to each other. And when you think about the worldviews and how they influence it, there's really 4 things that Creswell talks about: post-positivism, constructivism, pragmaticism, and transformative. And you'll see in Creswell's research what this is, but the reason why we think about a worldview is we want to frame how we want to approach our research. If we're doing something that is more constructivism as in nature, we're really trying to think about how to either understand or generate something. So this is a great worldview when you want to do something like a grounded theory mixed in with some kind of a data exploration. If you're looking at something that is going to be more real world practice oriented or trying to really solve a problem specifically, you want to go to pragmatic. And if you want to do something that is a little bit more social justice or change oriented, you want to look at transformative. So knowing how you're going to look at this and centering that around a specific worldview will also help you keep alignment as you go through the various steps. Understanding that, understanding the methods that we talked about before, there's a reason why we look at different things and why we look at mixed methods specifically, usually at Acacia. Now, you are allowed to move into quantitative or qualitative if you have a specific use case that is solid and can get the approval of the college. But for the most part, we're doing mixed methods. And the reason being is if you look at things such as with let's say the methods that we are doing with quantitative, it's very predetermined. We are doing specific t-tests or p-value analysis. We're looking at correlation. We're looking at things that are proven mathematically, whereas qualitative typically becomes a little bit more of an emerging method. While we are using established methods such as, let's say, phenomenological, you may use the Van Kam method for coding and stuff. It is still not always things that have been solidified and are scientifically driven in terms of mathematics. Also, with mixed methods, we are looking a lot of times at what we call open and closed-ended questions. We are looking at instrument-based closed-ended questions like surveys or preset data that you're getting from quantitative, but you're also looking at that exploratory open-ended elements such as semi-structured interviews or case study or ethnographic observations. You're also looking at being able to draw data from all different possibilities and having different analysis within that. So as you can see in the third and fourth line of this, we can grab data from all different data sets. It can be more the quantitative side where you have performance, attitude, observational, or census data that is more statistically analyzed, or you can look at those interview, observation, document, audiovisual type data that is more usually a text and image analysis that is human generated. And then having a combination of those within a mixed methods really helps you tell a full story. It also then really lets you go from, like I said, the theme and pattern interpretations that are in qualitative that's a little bit less scientific. And then you have your very mathematical and scientific based statistical interpretations in quantitative. Having the interpretation flexibility to look at both within mixed methods is key. So that's the reason why we push for those pieces. Now, as we think about the five first pieces within your concept paper and how you're going to be building on this, we've had you start to look at literature review topics and looking at like the background of your issue, your theory or conceptual frameworks. You're looking at themes within literature. That kind of then will help you go into your next part of your concept paper, which is your problem statement, which we've already covered. Looking at the issue, the population, the impact, trying to really figure out what's the crux of what you're trying to solve. That gets into the purpose of study. So this paragraph within your concept paper really focuses on what method of research are you looking at doing, qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods, and what kind of method within that. And then if you're doing quantitative, what are the variables and hypotheses that you're looking at? If you're doing it qualitative, what are the phenomena that you're trying to observe? This is then going to help influence your research questions. You should have at least one research question per type of research method. So if you're doing a mixed methods where you're going to be doing, let's say, a phenomenological interview with a survey data, I'm going to have at least one of each type of question, one qualitative, one quantitative. We typically recommend getting into about 3 to 4 questions, at least one quantitative, one qualitative. And you have to have specifically when you do quantitative measurements and you do a quantitative research question, you will have a specific hypothesis to that along with a specific dependent and independent variable. So you want to make sure that you're calling out specifically what you're trying to construct in your quantitative research. And this then gets into also your research design. So we've talked about qualitative, quantitative, but then we're looking at if I'm doing qualitative, Am I doing phenomenological? If I'm doing phenomenological, how am I going to codify that? Am I using a Van Cam method? If I'm doing quantitative and I'm going to be looking at things such as survey data, I'm going to then look at, okay, so how do I look at those elements? How am I going to look at that quantitative design? Am I going to be doing, like I said, survey research where I'm going to be pulling numeric descriptions of things? And then also, if I'm doing mixed methods, how am I going to pull those together? Am I doing a convergent method where I'm going to be looking at my interviews and my survey data simultaneously? Am I doing an explanatory where I'm going to be doing data analysis to make a grounded theory? Those are the things that you're looking at. But what's important is as you continue to work through all your different concepts, they need to be aligned. And if you find something or validate or modify something later on, it can actually make implications on the rest of your work. So if we think about this in terms of how we do things here, I could be working on my problem statement, makes me go back to my literature review and topics, makes me look at, okay, I need to find some more information regarding this specific population, this specific issue, this specific gap that I've seen. Well, once I do that, that literature review refinement may go back and make me go, okay, I need to look and see, does my research design, do those mixed method convergent style that I'm thinking I want to do, does that match what I want to continue doing? And if it doesn't, or if I need to tweak it, then I'm going back to my purpose of study. I'm refining what the research methods are going to be. Then I'm thinking about what are the variables or what are the phenomena I have to look at as well, which is then going to re-influence my research questions, which is also then I've got to go and validate, is that lining up to my problem statement? So again, all these things need to be cyclical. You need to say, okay, if I've updated some of my literature review, does that impact my problem statement? Does that impact my research design? If I update my research design, does that impact how my purpose of study or my research questions are? Every time you do things, it has to be aligned. It has to continue to grow together. So that's the reason why when you're in these kind of courses, you're continually building upon each other. So if we go back to the one of the examples that I had in the problem statement workshop, I had developed this problem statement regarding um, mid-sized regional hospitals in the southeastern U.S. with a lack of evidence-based frameworks for building supply chain resilience. So I talked about the different elements within there. I talked about my population, I talked about my region, talked about the industry, the gap, and the impact. Well, this problem statement, now I'm trying to then build into things, which is my purpose and my research design. Now, if I think about this, I want to do something that's a mixed methods, likely more of a convergent style. So I'm going to go and do this kind of a purpose statement. So the purpose of a mixed method study for this is to evaluate the relationship between the adoption of supply chain management technologies and equipment availability and patient outcomes in mid-sized regional hospitals. So again, kind of mirroring what I have in my problem statement in terms of what I'm going to be researching, but now I'm pulling it out and basing this on what I'm going to focus on specifically for my research. So I'm doing mixed methods. I'm looking at the relationship between the adoption of supply chain management technologies and the availability of equipment as well as patient outcomes. So I'm looking at two variables based on technology adoption. My quantitative side, I was going to use survey data to try to assess the perceptions and usage of supply chain technologies and their correlation with operational and clinical outcomes. The qualitative side of this is I want to employ some kind of a phenomenological approach using semi-structured interviews to gain a further understanding from supply chain professionals on how they navigated pandemic-related disruptions. And by giving this, and I'm doing a convergent style here, so by getting my semi-structured information, by getting my quantitative information at the same time, I'm then able to do a mixed method convergent style where I'm able to have a study that aims at development of an evidence-based, cost-effective resilience framework tailored for these regional hospitals. So these regional resilience frameworks are saying, how do you best effectively use technologies to help the impacts faced when dealing with um, pandemics or other type of emergency situations. So that's what I'm looking for. So with that, I'm going to have two sets of questions. First, I'm going to focus on my quantitative side. I'm doing survey research. So I'm going to have two research questions that are going over this. First is, to what extent does the adoption of supply chain management technologies correlate with the equipment availability in mid-sized hospitals? And then I also want to see, what does the adoption of these technologies correlate to patient outcomes? during these disruptions. So I'm doing one relationship specifically based on equipment availability, and I'm doing one specifically based on patient outcomes. Because I want to, in this, show the impact and the dynamics of what happened when things went awry, when you have pandemic scale disruptions. And the reason being is, even though there's some information out there, when I did my literature review and my themes in there, I noticed that there was a significant gap in what was being discussed in these areas. So my first element, my quantitative survey research, is to give me that information to help solidify the resilience programs that I want to give as recommendations with this. So the first hypothesis to my research in question one is there's statistically significant positive correlation between the level of supply chain technology adoption and equipment availability. So what we're going to look at is two variables. My independent variable is what is the supply chain adoption rates. So I'm going to use my survey scale models to get how much or how well they adopted technologies. And then I'm going to look at equipment availability as a dependent variable. How much did that change? In my second research question, my second hypothesis will be looking at the higher levels of supply chain technology adoption are associated with patient outcomes. So my thing here is my independent variable again, my level of supply chain technology adoption is now going to influence my dependent variable, which is patient outcomes. And this is going to be pre-reported things such as hospital reported metrics or length of stays, readmission rates, patient satisfaction scores, something along those lines. And ultimately, I could actually look at multiple variables here. And that's the reason why I said patient outcomes is because I want to, in my research, show is there a correlation difference between potentially different outcomes? Is there a difference between technology adoption and readmission rates versus length of stay versus patient satisfaction? I want to see if there's a difference there. And that will help me also discuss some of that. In terms of my qualitative side, I'm going to be looking at, like I said, my phenomenological method with semi-structured interviews. So I'm going to be looking at two questions. How do supply chain professionals in these hospitals describe their lived experiences during the COVID pandemic? And also I want to know what strategies these professionals employed to build resilience in the absence of economies of scale during the pandemic. And both of these are looking at different phenomena. One is the lived experiences of them during this, and also the other one is a resilience building strategy, because that's what I'm trying to build as my piece. Now, what I can also do is gaining the information from the survey, gaining the information from the interviews, and I can then converge these and correlate potentially information from this as well. So looking at the resilience building strategies and getting that information from there, or the lived experiences and getting that information from there, if I get the demographic information of where these individuals worked on both my quantitative and qualitative info sets, I then converge this to also provide additional reinforcement of my research when I'm done. So these are the things that you need to really consider as you start to build up everything and really start to see that all these elements need to be built together so that way you can build up your concept paper in uniform. Hope this makes sense. And if you have any questions, please reach out to your instructor or the college for more clarification.